Anytime I have a public conversation about urban politics, black politics, or racial politics, there are a couple of stats I kind of throw out. So I'll start out with the first. If you look at inequality from 1900 to now, it takes the shape of a U. Really high levels, like around 1929. Really, really high levels now, and there's this dip in the middle, right? And cities are particularly affected by this dynamic. And this dynamic has interracial elements and intraracial elements. In fact, inequality within black communities is higher than inequality within white communities. So some argue that with relationship to a city, that the best way to deal with the city issue is growth, right? A rising tide lifts all boats, and the best way to deal with income inequality is to focus on growth more broadly. But others argue that this approach actually concentrates resources even further. So my first question, and we've talked about this already, as far as I'm concerned, this is like a conversation that just happens to be mic'd. How are y'all approaching the question of inequality?
I'll say, to begin, for us it's policy. Also using the bully pulpit of mayor to uphold a standard. And then also really assessing what the needs of our community are, and then being intentional with the type of development, the types of supplemental resources, and the types of opportunities that are really necessary to lift those people that have been either underemployed, unemployed, or left, quote unquote, left behind. And so a specific policy that we implemented in Compton, a couple of months after I was elected, and I knew that we had one particular large project that was under consideration, and it was a 1 million square foot light industrial complex. And we ended up, I drafted and the council approved a local hiring policy and a community benefits agreement, which mandates a minimum of 35% local hiring for all new development, new construction, new businesses that either need city subsidy, need any type of city additional assistance, be it tax abatements or any type of economic development tools, and then also those that come through the city for new development. And we've seen our unemployment rate, which was at our peak when I assumed office, it was just under 19%, and today it's about 7.5%. And we still have about 700 jobs that are in the pipeline that will be that will come online in January that we're focusing on filling within our residents with aggressive hiring measures. So definitely need the policy, you need the opportunities, and then you need intentional leadership to ensure that all growth is not good growth. You want growth that really assesses the needs of the community and it really helps supplement those pillars that are deficient, that can create a strong base and that your community can grow.
If I could join, can y'all hear me?
Yes, sir.
If I can join Mayor Brown's assessment, I think that we do really have to look at the specific policies that are implemented and how it contributes to those inequalities. For instance, when we look at a city like Jackson, Mississippi, Jackson is a city like many cities that doesn't have a problem producing wealth. It has a problem maintaining wealth. All of the money that's made in Jackson between 9 and 5 just happens to be out by 6. There are businesses that come to Jackson because it is a capital city and thrive, do very well, but they're not invested in the community. They're not invested in the people that give birth or allows that business to have success. And so what we try to demonstrate is an attitude of a business-friendly city, that we want businesses to come. We want them to make a lot of money. We want them to be wealthy, but we want them to invest back in the community. And so we try to enforce that and implement, well, not enforce it, but try to encourage that. But beyond that, if your strategy is dependent on someone else to act, you really don't have a strategy. And so we look at other models of economic development. And so we're encouraging cooperative business models, which isn't something new. In fact, those are models that, when you look at the early days of people like Fannie Lou Hamer, my Mississippi girl, right? who looked at how poor people pull their resources together in order to create a better economic condition. And so that's one thing that we're looking at. Jackson, Mississippi, a city of approximately 180,000 people, the largest city in the state of Mississippi, has no movie theater within our city limits. And so what we see are bedroom communities that take advantage of our population, take advantage and build on the peripheries of our city. And we don't want to see ourselves at war with our neighbors. However, we have to make certain that Jackson can thrive, that the trunk of the tree thrives. And so we believe that if we begin to demonstrate an ability and a willingness to fill our own voids, then most people don't see the power or the worth of your investment until you build it yourself. And so we're willing to build it ourselves.
Can I add to the wealth argument? In Richmond, a city of 225,000 people, another capital city as well. People know about the history of Richmond, the former capital of the Confederacy. And inequality has been around for a very, very long time, decades. But recently, Richmond has been on the uptick. I mean, it's an emerging city. Over the last 6 years, over 20,000 people have moved to the city of Richmond. It has a booming economy when you include also the region as well. It's a destination for young people. Between the ages of 20 and 29 years old, 23% of our population are made up of those individuals. So it's attracting people. But we have to work on growing our talent. And I have to tip my hat to my predecessor before me, Dwight C. Jones. He created the Office of Community Wealth Building. And that was an office focused on building wealth in those who needed the most. Richmond has 25% poverty. 40% of the children live on the poverty line. And so we have a city that's attracting high wealth and a lot of investment, creating millionaires year on end. But how do we go about involving those who've been living in Richmond for a number of years? And so we've taken a concerted effort, an intentional effort in wealth building, particularly focused on job training. In my city, I put more money into job training than any mayor has ever before. And I announced also we gained a grant recently from the state, $1.4 million to focus on job training. We're attracting a lot of jobs to the city of Richmond. That's a plus. That's a good thing. But if we don't have a workforce ready to have those jobs, particularly individuals who look like me, then what are we really doing? And in a downtown like ours, there's entities from the private sector and the public sector who are investing in roughly $2 billion over the next 5 to 10 years. And I always say to my residents and to those in the business community, it'd be a damn shame if only a mile away from here, the residents who live under the poverty line don't have a piece of that wealth. I'm not in the business of creating more and more millionaires. I want to be in the business of creating more people who can actually sustain themselves on their own without the help of the local government and the state government. And that's why we have to be intentional about how we go about building that wealth. And that, I think, is through job training, giving them the skills necessary to compete in the 21st century economy.
Aurora, Illinois, where I've been mayor for about 6 months, our situation's size similarly to Richmond. However, we're not nearly in that position that you're in with growth and jobs and the economy. We've struggled over the last 4 decades to replace those factory jobs that have left our communities and has done away with our middle class. We have what I call middle class flight, leaving our city and nothing to replace it. So what we need to do to replace it is to attract those businesses and opportunities for our young people so they don't want to leave our community when they become educated. And one of the things we had to do, because our city is such an old city, I'm the first African-American mayor in 180 years. Thank you. And in our city, because of the infrastructure that wasn't looked after, in all these decades, didn't have the foundation to attract these businesses, attract this opportunity. So over the last 10 years, what we focused on is creating that infrastructure, creating that base that we can build on. So once we have that base, that infrastructure, we can start attracting those businesses and creating, the jobs and opportunities, and then take it an additional level. If we want to get that middle class back, we've got to provide educational opportunities. We have to re-educate our people. Those factories aren't coming back. It's never going to be the way it used to be. But if Aurora wants to ever be in a position where Richmond is, where we're attracting business and opportunity and we're building millionaires and wealth, what we're going to have to do is re-educate our folk and get into some of these new jobs and new areas. This is the age of technology.
That's right.
And because these factories aren't going to come back, we've got to educate our people along the lines of technology so they can work at these jobs we look to attract our cities.
If I could just add a point to that with respect to technology, because I think it is very important that we recognize where we're moving in society, where technology is more readily accessible to the everyday man and woman. We have to make certain that we command control of that new technology and not allow it to become a problem. Though I am the mayor of Jackson, Mississippi, I am originally from Detroit, Michigan. And as we saw technology advance over time and factories go more to robotics, when the unions were arguing that, you keep people on, that you don't fire them, that you allow them to spend more time with their families and pay them the same wages, those institutions felt that was a ridiculous notion, right? And so they laid people off and went more to robotics. And what they forgot is that robots don't buy cars, right?
That is true.
And so the individuals who were producing those vehicles were the most loyal consumer of the product in which they produced. And so now when we see fabrication technology taking place, I've had the opportunity to travel in different places around the world and see how this technology really allows people on a grassroots level to produce just about anything. We've seen people who are making cars now, making homes with this fabrication technology. And so in Jackson, it's important to us that as we have this idea of what we call a dignity economy, moving away from a space where we take away all of those things that have been what we considered, just detrimental to our society, whether it's blight, whether it's poverty, that we now move into a space of human dignity where we're teaching our young people how to work this technology, how to fill the voids and the gaps in which they see in their community and use it as a means to produce wealth within the community.
So a follow-up question, Stoney. So I was talking to Mayor Irvin in the back. Another slide. If you look at productivity over time, productivity goes up along as wages go up, right? Until around 1970, wages flatline and productivity increases. So when you're talking about wealth building, but your wealth building solution is job training. Mm-hmm. How do you ensure that the jobs you're training folk for actually have the wages and benefits that allow them to live a decent life?
Here's the thing. I think that we can't just be training our people, our residents, just for construction jobs that are just temporary. We got to be training for careers. And that has to start beyond beyond the time that they're adults. I think what some fail to do sometimes is to be honest, that K through 12 unfortunately has failed a lot of our residents, particularly in inner cities. And are those individuals who are looking for jobs right now at the moment. And so we have been very intentional about investing more in public education, putting good teachers in the classroom. But also, I think you got to call it out for what it is. Virginia is a right to work state. And in a right to work state, with no unions and whatnot, saying that you were for a $15 minimum wage is like, the third rail. And when I ran for mayor last year, I stood up and said I was with all the workers in my city that work for a $15 minimum wage. And I don't see enough municipal leaders doing that. And I see what's going on in places like Seattle and other parts of the country where nothing's really changed in terms of people still going into the restaurants, still buying the goods. I just think that those individuals who do the work that some of us may choose not to do deserve a wage that treats them with dignity as well. And $7 an hour, $7.50, that's not enough.
You bring up something that's basically the next question. So each of you live in different state contexts, right? So cities are nested in states, and now we've got the national context that part of me doesn't really want to talk about, but we're going to have to. You
said it.
Give me a second.
For real?
How you all negotiated your different state contexts, right? So Mayor Brown, you're in a blue state. Mayor Lumumba, you're in a state that you can't get any redder. How do you navigate? For real, how do you navigate those, or how do you plan to navigate those different state contexts? You know, particularly in dealing with the issue of inequality.
Well, as a economic developer and practitioner, I look at cities as their own systems, and they exist within ecosystems around them. So there's never a one-size-fits-all approach when you're talking about job training or even incubation or business attraction, because it just depends on what are the high growth industries within your particular region. But from a national lens, infrastructure is one thing this nation must deal with, because we are coming to the point to where the majority of our infrastructure is aged, and there is going to require a significant investment in order to address that. Locally, I was actually one of the first cities in our region to introduce a sales tax measure for our residents, and that really laid out that this money is our opportunity to create our own economy, that we can create jobs, we can address our infrastructure, we can address our parks and other social services that we need with a dedicated source of revenue. And it put our city in position to where, after the county came after us and other cities came after us and even the state came after us, we were still able to keep a larger percentage of our money local. But I say that to say that when you think about construction or all of the surrounding industries, for instance, in California, they're in LA, the LA region as a whole, there are several NFL teams that have located into our immediate region. There's also a state measure that was just approved in July, SB1, which is California's infrastructure investment development tool. And so that creates local return for our city as well. And so we went from a city that had 98% of our streets in total disrepair as an F grade when I took office to, we didn't even have any assessments done. We didn't even know what the price tag was. And so it took time to get all of that together. But with our dedicated source of revenue now, we can repave every street. We're adding lights. We're really focusing on restoring our community's dignity and with basic things like parks that most people take for granted, and basic services. And so with the addition of the state, and I'm not even touching federal yet, we still will have an additional, we're almost 45% additional revenue to be able to deal with. And so this is a big time in our city. And so when I think about construction, I don't think of it as necessarily a temporary position in my region, because not only do we have different industries that are moving in, but we also have major light rail construction going on. We also have infrastructure going on throughout our community as a region as a whole. So there are going to be construction jobs in my city in my region for the next 50 years. And so for us, it makes sense to be able to train people in that in those fields, but it makes sense for us to be able to facilitate entrepreneurship and to also tap into the new economy. Most people know Compton as from straight out of Compton and really being a influential force in pop culture. We have major people that have been influential in all sectors come from our city. However, when I was a couple of years ago and dealing with the launch of Straight Outta Compton, the remake, and dealing with the movie studios and really talking about, okay, what does this mean for my community? I learned that those supportive industries that make pictures and make movies work, they earn 6-figure incomes. And so how does my community connect with that upward mobility? And so I brought our college on board and connected them with our unions. And so now we're looking at how do we create our own cinema training program that can create a pipeline to Hollywood and create not only just Hollywood, but how do we create our own Compton wood? Because for me, all awesome things come out of Compton, but I'm at a point in my life personally and then looking at nationally that I'm not particularly interested in beating someone down to treat me equal. I believe that we need to create our own opportunities for our people so that at the end of the day, we all can live a decent and a dignified life. And it doesn't mean that it's going to come from the national level or the state level. We have to do that at the local level. And so with our change in leadership at the White House, I mean, it's unfortunate for my little babies in my community who think that bullies can win. And I have to tell them, no, they don't eventually. But for me, on a day-to-day basis, there is a disconnect from us with the White House. Obviously, we talked about this behind the scenes. But for me, my day-to-day life has not changed. I'm still dealing with the same realities. I have the same resources, the same deficiencies. And so we have to make it happen. And that's the reality for cities.
Gotcha.
You know, there's so many things that I can say based on your question. But I'll start with this. You know, as people ask the question to me after Donald Trump took office, the Wednesday after, I shared with them that I woke up in Mississippi. which means that no matter whether Donald Trump is president, Barack Obama, Clinton, or Bush, Mississippi has always been at the bottom. Right. And so it is apparent to me that what is going to change that dynamic is what we do locally. So in Jackson, we're in a space where it is decidedly red, right? Well, Mississippi is. But you deal with a city of Jackson, which is 85% black, the highest population, and provides the most revenue to the state of Mississippi, right? And so what we look to do is look to exploit what we call operational unity, identifying what our common interests are and speaking to those dynamics. The fact that whether you consider yourself Democrat or Republican, it doesn't seem to have been serving you well thus far, right? And so what are we going to decide to do to change those dynamics? In Jackson, it's a space where, as we observe the landscape, I spoke about how it doesn't have a problem producing wealth. It's the ability to maintain that becomes a problem. Also, Jackson is considered a college town. We have a number of institutions. We have approximately 40,000 college students in Jackson. So we are producing some of the higher wage skill sets, but we're losing that talent. And so that means that our greatest exports are our money and our talent. Yeah. And so we're looking at how we reverse that trend so that we can create space for ourselves. Once again, if your strategy is dependent upon someone else, you don't have a strategy. So it's about how we set in place economic policy measures and also ideas that help benefit the city of Jackson. And then we have the idea of turning our city into a classroom, giving space and opportunity to many of the young people who want to foster their development, that they can have opportunity within our city to learn their craft, to develop, and let us be a proving ground for their skills and abilities, and ultimately making ourselves more attractive to them to stay for the long haul.
Yeah.
Our state happens to be a red state right now. And I don't.
Oh, that's right. My fault.
You're right. No, exactly right. And I was surprised, to read this, about a year ago, that Illinois is the third to last state to provide appropriate educational funding for our young people. Illinois in the United States of America, in the Union, almost last in the Union as far as growth and bringing economic development and opportunity. We are ranked last in so many categories that I lose track after a while. Now I like to think that we are a separate entity as well, and although in Aurora we are a home rule city, I'm the strong mayor. I'm the CEO of a $450 million organization. 1,500. You
want that home rule?
Right, exactly right. Close to 1,500 employees. A number of unions that we deal with. But the reality is, we're affected by what goes on at the state level. Our state not only attempted, they voted to balance their budget on our backs. Mm-hmm. Where in our budget we lost over $3 million because the state decided to take the money, our sales tax that's coming to us that we generate in our city. Mm-hmm. They said, well, we're going to need some of this money to balance our budget. Wow. And then we're going to charge you a fee to give you your money back.
Y'all actually got a budget now?
Yeah, right. Barely. Right. So, when I ran for office, one of the things that I stated that we needed to do, we needed to function regardless of how our state was functioning and the failings in our state government. We need to stand strong and stand strong alone. I need to effectively go out and attract business to the city of Aurora. I need to go out. You can't wait for a business to come knocking on your door and say, I'm thinking about coming. You mind if I come set up shop? It's just not going to happen. If we really want change, we've got to affect change. So I've got to identify businesses and corporations and any interests that might be looking for a city like Aurora and woo them to our community. Regardless of what's going on with our governor and with our state. I've got to be proactive, about growing our city. I hope that, Illinois starts to rank up there, and they, gets their stuff together. Matter of fact, in Aurora, we're in 4 different counties. Yeah. We have 6 different school districts. Huh. We have about 4 different state reps, 3 different state senators. So we got to bring all these people together on the same accord so we can communicate and effectively make change in our city. And of course, these individuals, politics involved. And I like to say that I'm not a politician, I'm a public servant that we talked about earlier. But the reality is some of these folks are politicians, and they got lobbyists down in Springfield, in our state capital, that's saying, we want you to do something, we want you to do one thing, regardless of the fact it doesn't appropriately affect or benefit your communities. So, it's hard, to get everybody on the same page, the same accord. As I said, we're the 2nd largest city, second to Chicago, of course. And we got some work to do to get everybody on the same page.
Stoney,
I gotta say, I will say I'm in an envious position because I'm a blue city in a quickly blue changing state as well. Yeah. This past November, election day was really, really good for the city of Richmond. We didn't have we didn't have any seats in the city proper, but our House of Delegates went from high 60s towards Republicans now, basically to a 50-50 in the General Assembly. And our governors, AG and LG, were all Democrats beforehand. Now they're all Democrats again after this November. And we're the capital city. I used to work as Secretary of the Commonwealth, Secretary of State. Now I'm also the mayor of the city. And so I've been able to have an open door policy with the governor. But having that sort of relationship with the state government, and as we host them as the capital city, you have to be able to find the ability to call them out when necessary. Yeah. Particularly, when it comes to crime, when it comes to investment in public safety. Unlike you, Mayor Irvin, I happen to have a Dillon Rule state, which is, the grandfather of all preemption laws. We have to go to the General Assembly for the blessing to do certain things like, ensuring that residents can't bring guns into the council chamber. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I gotta go for the blessing of the
like for real.
You don't get to make
that's real.
Yeah, that's not no fake thing.
And a city like Richmond, where like I said, 40% of our children live on the poverty line, but they treat DC, Northern Virginia suburbs as because they have rising enrollments. The formula fits them more than it helps us, and so. My job is to ask, and I do that every single day. I'm gonna miss my best friend, my mentor, my former boss, Terry McAuliffe, who's now leaving out. He's leaving at the end of this year. But I have a friend and a new governor as well. When you're the mayor of a city, your job is to not beg, but ask. Because at the end of the day, the folks who live in a city like Richmond, 225,000 residents and beyond in the region, these are voters.
Yeah.
These are a few people who voted for this party at this particular time. And I think my residents deserve as much as the residents in any other of the metropolitan regions in the state. And so I won't ever beg, but I will ask. Yeah.
I'm going to try to come back to economic development because one of the elephants in the room in my head is a question about something like Amazon. But what I want to do is segue.
Nobody's competing for that here.
You got a video?
Trifling. Crime, right? So we've got in a city like Baltimore, we had a crime spike in like 92 or 93. Then we had homicides. Then we had a second spike in 2015. And the numbers have been diminishing somewhat, but we're still around that 1992 level. So what are some of so you've got crime at the same time you have significant trust issues, to be polite, where folks look at in places like Baltimore. I grew up in Inkster. I'm from Detroit as well. In places like Baltimore, Detroit, a number of people look at the police as the occupying force. What are some of the ways that you've actually dealt with those dual issues of the police and trust issues on one hand, and then crime on the other?
Go ahead. Well, all right. So one of the things that we did was very similar to what you were telling me about in Compton. Is we imposed what's called community policing, or we created a way of the police working in the community, not as some paramilitary force that's waiting to arrest somebody, and pull a gun on them, but as community participants that actually go out in our community. We want to go back to the beat cop. Police that are in our community, working with our young people, working with our community members. So, helping our community members take back their own community. Because, I don't care how effective you say your police department is. If you don't have the buy-in from the community where the police is doing the work, it's just going to revert back to, to high crime. So, what I call the 3 C's: children, cops, community. We've got to focus on education. A lot of our kids, a lot of the young people that are breaking the law, we know are kids that aren't in school, aren't, becoming appropriately educated. Cops, COP, our community-oriented police officers that we have working in the community. In our community itself, the community groups that we created, little block community groups where, they go block to block and police their own community and, take back their community. Matter of fact, we have an organization we created called TVOC, Take Back Our Community, which focus on quality of life. Something simple. If we address crime at its root level, then it won't get to the point where we've got massive murders and violent crime. If we focus on maybe planting a pot, planting flowers at the end of a corner where maybe a young man is standing out selling drugs, we put flowers there. He's not going to stand out there, at that area where we just spent so much time, investing in our community. So it's about getting our people to invest in their community. It doesn't matter where they own a house, where they rent a house, where they live in low-income housing. I grew up in low-income housing in the city of Aurora, the Aurora Housing Authority. A single mom raising two young boys. I say 2 young nappy-head boys, And back then we had our young mothers, that would actually, in the 70s. So our young mothers would look after our young kids, make them take pride in our community, even though we were getting, this was living, in low-income housing, subsidized for most of us. Take pride in it. If we don't take pride in our community and focus on the quality of life, it's going to get to the point where we've got 30 murders a year. In the 90s, Aurora had a spike as well. And per capita, we ranked in the top 10 for a number of violent crimes and murders. And 10 years later, we had a year in 2012 where we had 0 murders in the city of Aurora. Wow. Now, that's huge. Wow. It's because we implemented programs, for example, like Weed and Seed, where we weed out crime and blight, and we seed it with opportunity and prosperity. I was a prosecutor for a number of years, and one of my jobs as a prosecutor was to work in the community with police, with our community members, to create an environment where we all wanted to work together to improve our circumstance. And because I was from the hood, I understood, what we were dealing with coming from the hood. And I could communicate to these police officers that we're not from the hood. It happened many times. They were white police officers from affluent areas that would attempt to police these Black and Hispanic low-income areas. And there was a breakdown in communication. What we had to do was teach people how to communicate and, so we could understand each other, empathize and sympathize, and recognize what we needed to do to address our issues at a root level. Yeah. So, that's one of the ways we looked at how we reduce crime.
If we look at the issue of crime, we have to be honest with ourselves. And in being honest with ourselves, we have to acknowledge that our country has become far too dependent on a criminal justice system. Right? We all say the phrase crime doesn't pay, right? The reality is crime pays very well. In fact, if crime stopped, if crime stopped tomorrow, our economy would crash. Look at all of the law enforcement we have. If people think back to a day, there are some people old enough to remember where you didn't have as much law enforcement that we have now. Yeah. We have city police, we have county police, we have state police, we have federal police, we have secret police. We have secret police who watch secret police, right? And then we look at the prison systems. We have the attorneys that are employed by crime. We have the judges. And so we've become too dependent, and all of that requires that we over-criminalize our society, right? And so what we have to begin to do is take a comprehensive look at crime. We live in a country that has more law enforcement than any other country in the world. We have more people incarcerated than any other country in the world. Yet we have more crime than any other country in the world. And so if there was a correlation between over-policing a society, then we would have the best crime numbers on the planet, right? And so that means that we have to take a more comprehensive look and look at the factors that contribute to crime. Crime isn't unique to our communities. Crime isn't unique to black communities. Wherever you have high poverty, you have high crime, right? And so you have to look at what you can do to affect those conditions and the link that is there between those conditions and the criminal element. And then it's about how you engage young people to affect those conditions. And so that's what we're focusing on. We're taking on community policing efforts, but we're also looking at taking some of these abandoned buildings, some of these former schools that we've now had to close and make them into teen centers, opportunities for young people to explore their interests. We're looking at putting studios, music studios, in these spaces. So, and we have rules in those spaces. No derogatory language, no misogynist material. But we want to nurture your gift. You may become the next Jay-Z. You probably won't, right? But whether you do or not, you see a community. You see a community that is invested in you. And it's a lot easier telling a young person what to do than telling them what not to do. Right?
Yeah, I got you.
I would say as a segue, I agree wholeheartedly with all the sentiments of the mayor and understanding all of those facts and realities. In Compton, I didn't believe that we can police our way into a safer city. In all my years in studying policy, planning, and development, I've never seen it. And so in Compton, I didn't have the opportunity or the resources to have that option to invest in more police. And so for me, I knew I had to look at the causal factors, which were who are the people that are committing the crimes? And then narrowing down their gang members. Well, who are these gang members? And really, what is their social fabric? Because the nation still has not dealt with appropriately the war on drugs, the drug epidemic, and really how that decimated a generation of communities everywhere. And it's not a black issue, it's not a white issue, it's a people issue. And people in our nation are still dealing with drugs, and drugs have causal factors that tear down the fabric of your families, of your community. And as a community, as a city, we have to augment those. And so my first month on the job, I had a community policing task force launch, but we focused on two different areas, not just intervention, but also the prevention aspect. And so we created public awareness campaigns, we created youth programs, mentorship programs, and then a year later, I began to embark on the intervention and asked some of the people that have worked with us in that space to help me assemble I wanted the most dangerous, I wanted those people that were shot callers, I wanted those people that were really key and critical in creating crime in my community, and I asked them to come meet with me. And we sat in a room similar to this size. I had every gentleman and some women pull up a chair. There were about 100 folks there. And we all sat in a circle, and I let them know that, number one, we're sitting in a circle because we're all connected, and we're all dependent and reliant on one another. And our city cannot grow, our city cannot exist in the future without all of us, and we have to make a decision. And I asked them, well, what are some of your challenges and barriers from really living a life of dignity and not being involved in crime? And I had grown men crying and telling me that, you know what, they hadn't seen some folks that were sitting in that room since they were kids because they would not cross different neighborhoods. And just to give you some context, Compton is 10 square miles.
Yeah, it's not that
We're
big.
100,000 residents.
Yeah.
And we have about 30 quote unquote gangs. And so the amount of folks in these quote unquote gangs is not a huge number. However, it creates more opportunity for conflict when you have so many different gangs, and when the number one cause of gang violence is not because there are two gangs against the gang, there's a person against a person within a gang, and the gang responds. And so really understanding that there's conflict mitigation, there's relationship issues. And so I asked the men to self-select a leadership body, and we kept meeting every 2 weeks. And about the third meeting, I said, you all need to create a leadership body so that we can continue to go deeper into this. And so we started meeting twice a week, and we put together different activities to really bring unity and just fellowship. We had a baseball game where 3,000 gang members and their families came out, and we had the sheriffs there too, which we don't have our own law enforcement, we have the sheriffs, but there was no violence, a day of peace, and we continued on in this process. But the first phase for me was life skills. How do you, number one, we can't even get to leadership until you can understand just basic life skills. And when people are incarcerated, when they're separated from their families, when they're fatherless, they're missing a lot of basic tenets to being a functional man, a functional woman. And so we taught life skills as a mandatory requirement in order to get to the leadership training, which is a mandatory requirement for the job training and the placement. And so we had reached out to companies and that would guarantee us to be able to hire those people that went through our programs. And we have gentlemen who are now earning $40 an hour in construction that are taking care of their families, that have really transformed their lives because they had an opportunity. And so I believe that if you give someone an opportunity for a better life and you give them the tools to reach it, they're going to take that. And it's not that people want to live in poverty. It's not that people want to be oppressed. It's that they don't have any other options. And when you give someone a choice to survive, they're going to survive. And so my job as the mayor is to create more opportunities so that that's not the only option you have, is to create violence and havoc on our kids. And the last thing, you have to have some tangible reason as to why it is that you want to save your city. And so for me, I asked them, what is your why? And for them, they wanted their kids to grow up to reach 25 years old or to actually live longer than they thought that they would live, because some people didn't believe that they would come out of their teens. And so for our why was, how do we create a safer city for the next generation? And so therefore we started focusing on arts and culture. We worked with Dr. Dre to build a new performing arts center in the city of Compton. We're working on a movie theater now. Actually, we have a movie theater coming to the city of Compton that we've put together a theater component. So
Magic Johnson?
No, not Magic Johnson. It's called Maya Cinemas.
Larry's a movie theater too.
Maya Cinemas is great. They're like an ice pick. I highly recommend them. And then we also have, we're actually focusing on building a studio so that people, again, can create movies, create music in their own community. And we've seen the growth, we've seen the change and the momentum with the community, because it has to be about self-determination. What do you want? Yeah. And what does your future look like? And you have to plot that vision. You have to create that strategy, because people, when they see a strategy upward, they're going to take it. The reality of people there, it's natural for people to follow. So as leaders, we have to create them with that pathway for success. And that has to be really clear and simple. And it doesn't mean that you have to go to college. I work with our college to create, our local community college, create more vocational programs. And our CEO, I love him to death, Dr. Curry, if you're listening, he didn't want to do it, but I said, you know what, everyone's not going to college. And people still can create a great income with being in welding, HVAC, cosmetology we brought back, expanding our nursing. So really looking at what is the future of an industrialized nation, and how do we create our people to compete with all of the global economy, and then creating those new industries like tech and all of the green jobs, even solar panels and all those things that really are, someone may not acknowledge global warming, but it's happening. And so the industry is still developing. And so I'm making sure that my folks are involved in that upper mobility. And so we have to be our own economic developers. We can't wait till someone tells us that, this is what you should do. You need to look at your city as a system, look at the opportunities, and as entrepreneurs, look at where can I find a solution to an issue that can create opportunities. And it's no one way that I believe is a key to success. But when we think about crime and violence, when I think about someone taking their life or taking their friend's life or being in that environment, they just feel hopeless. And so how do you restore hope? How do you recreate value in a human being's life to where people do not feel that it's acceptable to take someone else's life over something stupid as someone's girlfriend or something minor? And so it's really going back to the human aspect, and at a bigger level, I would want someone to tell me, what are our American values again? Can we get back to what are our American values? What are our community values? And really be able to build forward from that. Because if you do not know who you are, you cannot have a future.
Yeah, I got you. So a couple of other statistics to really push forward the idea that we've got a policing challenge. So here in Baltimore, I think 1 out of every 4 municipal employees works for the police department. Police spending has increased from $145 million in like 1990 to about $500 million now. There's a phrase that, I'm an Americanist, I study American politics, but for folks who study like international relations and comparative politics, if we were looking at a nation state, the phrase would be like a garrison state. So one way to think about Baltimore, it's kind of like a police state in some ways, and that generates all types of challenges. I want to move to one other area, and then what we're going to do is open it up. As an aside, the panelists, when I told them I had the ability to make sure somebody didn't give a speech when they were asking a question, they didn't believe me. But trust, that when we get to Q&A, if you can really ask a question rather than give a speech, it'd be a kind of a good look.
We'll see. We'll see. We've heard this before.
Y'all can outdress me, but so as a result of shifts and kind of the ability of cities to accumulate resources, one of the things that cities have actually done is kind of outsourced a number of tasks, right? So, for example, spending on parks and recs in Baltimore has remained stable. $35 million in 1990 and about $35 million now. One of the reasons is because, to a certain extent, some of the parks and recs stuff has been outsourced to a foundation, Parks and People. They do wonderful work. But the challenge with that type of public-private partnership is that it can actually reduce the ability of citizens to have a say in how their city is governed. So I was wondering if you could talk about maybe some of the public-private partnerships you've engaged in at the city level, and then how you've been able to kind of navigate that with still giving people the right to determine how their city functions.
You know, we have a strong union presence in our city. And matter of fact, many of their union contracts make it illegal for us to outsource many of our local jobs inside city government. However, there are, for example, we have our 911 station. We have a hard time hiring and maintaining people to work as 911 operators. My mother actually was a 911 operator in the city of Aurora for a number of years. She just retired last year. And you know, I think our full complement would be 30 people, and we're at about 15 people, and have been at that point for a number of years. And in my conversations with the union, I said, let me get this straight. You would rather be underemployed and understaffed than allow us to contract some of these positions out so we could at least at least provide the service, to these police officers and firemen with 911. And their position pretty much was, well, that'd be taking union jobs, even though those union jobs aren't filled. So we have a hard time because of the strong union presence, and I understand the importance of the union by having public-private partnerships and outsourcing. So I'd be interested to hear, how some of the mayors deal with that.
Well, I think, as we've observed the landscape of what has been a problem in Jackson historically, I think we've gotten out of balance in terms of what we outsource and what we do in-house. And I think that we need to separate the discussion between what is considered outsourcing work or privatization versus P3s, public-private partnerships. I think that, Jackson, a city where, we used to collect our own garbage. The city used to actually fulfill that service for itself, has now got into contracts that aren't working to the benefit of the city nor to the benefit of the citizens. For instance, because the proper measures weren't implemented, we're paying a heavier price tag for the service of garbage collection than the actual houses that people actually occupy, right? And so I think that we have to demand an appropriate balance. And I think my philosophy, and Mayor Brown actually spoke to this, I think that proper leadership has guiding principles that inform its decision making. And I subscribe to the principle of self-determination. And so I look for opportunities that our city and our community can be more self-determined and not dependent on someone else to do what's right. But there are opportunities in advancing your city for public-private partnerships. And those partnerships usually arise out of a circumstance where the benefit is spread amongst both entities, both the city and the companies that are supporting. We have public-private partnerships with respect to our city pools. There are businesses that have, taken on the maintenance that, we have memorandums of understanding that they can't jack up the rate that, the dollar that children may have to pay to go swim at those pools. We have a public-private partnership with one of our historic golf courses. In fact, it was the first golf course in Jackson and potentially in the state of Mississippi. I'd have to check on that fact that African Americans could play at. And so there was a lot of trepidation with the community there about what we do and whether we allow this entity to take it over. But we were able to do so in a way that did not compromise the availability to the community nor the community's say-so and how it's kept. And so those opportunities are there, but they have to be vetted, and there has to be a proper balance between what we outsource and what we do in-house. Because not only does it not work to the benefit of those city employees, it very often robs the coffers of the city government budget. We look at Chicago, for instance. Oh, yeah. We look at their parking issue. Yeah. I think everybody in the world knows about Chicago's parking issue. Right. That was a discussion that the council was taking up prior to my election about the privatization of our parking meters. Now, without question, we have to upgrade our parking system in Jackson. I believe we are the only place that you still put a quarter into the meter. Wow. Right? If it works.
We
right?
still do this.
You're not alone. You're not alone.
Okay. You can find a couple.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't feel quite as bad. I don't feel quite as bad. But with the invent of technology, we have the opportunity for apps. There are apps now that when you go to park, they'll tell you that your meter's running out and you don't have to even leave your meeting. And so though we can entertain the idea of outsourcing the installation of those meters, I believe that it is important for the long-term investment of our city that we control that it be something that the city owns as opposed to someone else. These private entities they're in it for business. They're in it to turn a profit, and so where that profit can be regenerated into the city's coffers, I think that's a better way of looking at it.
Lester, I entertain public-private partnerships in Richmond, but I think Mayor hit on it earlier. It's about who is calling the shots. Is the taxpayers and the people in the city calling the shots, or the private sector calling the shots? And I think we should be the ones calling the shots. For instance, recently we just released a request for proposal on the redevelopment of a part of our downtown, the north of Broad downtown redevelopment. And it's about redeveloping a Coliseum that's gone into disrepair, redeveloping a transfer station, a bus transfer station, so my residents don't sit out in the cold, sleet, rain, and snow throughout the year, ensuring that we get local jobs to the local residents, and affordable housing, all in this 10-block radius of downtown. Now, one thing I said in this proposal was that the city would not use its moral or general obligation bonds to fund this project. Because in the past, my residents, and I'm sure the residents of many of our cities on this panel right here, the cities have been taken for a ride at times by the private sector.
That's right.
And I said, well, I'd rather put more money into building schools that's going to invest in the child, which can be an asset for the city moving forward, instead of investing in arenas and ballparks. And unfortunately, as you all have seen in the past, there's a number of real sports episodes on this, cities are the ones left holding the bag. But I'll say this, there are positives that can come out of public-private partnerships. We have one with our downtown area where they put on events, they clean up our downtown. Richmond employees are hired to do that job. But also, when it comes to our school children, we created 2 partnerships this year that sit well with me. Number one, with Sprint, ensuring that 5,000 of our high schoolers now get a laptop or get a tablet to actually do their homework and take a device home. And these are kids who are coming from underserved neighborhoods. Now they can actually compete with their counterparts in the surrounding counties. But the one that really sits well with me is that we created a partnership with 2 nonprofits now that 20,000 children in Richmond public schools can now receive vision screenings and free eyeglasses. And I tell you, I went to this event, this woman came to me and she said to me, and it will always stick with me, and this is why this stuff matters. She said, you know what, my son was a recipient of one of your screenings, and he's 7 to 8 years old. I did not know that he was blind in one eye.
Wow.
7 years of his life, he walked around in school blind in one eye. He left school that day with a pair of glasses. Now, I'm always going to stand up and raise my hand and say, I'll be a part of any partnership that involves investing in our children as a positive for the city. But if the city's going to be left holding the bag, I want no part of it.
I would say briefly, not repeat some of the things that have been said. One of the things that we focus on with public-private joint ventures within our administration is really looking at additional services that can be provided to the community that the city is not in a position to provide. And that example is like post-traumatic stress syndrome counseling. PTSD is extremely high. About 95% of all folks living in an urban community has some degree of post-traumatic stress syndrome, and it's already statistically higher than even those folks that come back from serving our country in war. And so we reached out to Venus and Serena, actually Serena Williams, and the sisters collectively decided to launch the Yetunde Price Resource Center that focuses on helping people that have been affected by trauma as their family was actually impacted by trauma. And the center is named after their sister who was gunned down in Compton many decades ago. And so this center is focused on wraparound services using art to be able to address different issues going on with children. They're also going into a neighborhood housing project. They're doing counseling with those parents there on site. We've also partnered with Volunteers for America. They're one of the largest nonprofits in the nation, but they didn't have a very strong presence in Compton. And so we work with them to open up a facility in the city of Compton, a city building that was underutilized, and co-located shelters for families, where in the nonprofit sector, sometimes nonprofits can kind of be against one another, but I kind of facilitated some partnership with those 2 organizations. So they're co-locating in the community to provide full wraparound services to our communities. They provide counseling, they provide job training, they provide housing, vouchers, assistance. And we worked collectively in this last year to really look at the issues that the city was focusing on tackling and how could they position their resources to be a help to that. And so we co-wrote a few grants focusing on single fathers, teenage fathers within our community. We also have mentorship programs. We have job training where we will pay for someone's college education to go get a trade within the special growth industries that are already identified by the Department of Labor as growth areas. We'll also provide gap housing. If someone is in need of assistance, we can actually help them stay in their home or get into a new home so that they can be stable. So really looking at the whole person, and the city is just not in position to provide those type of specialized resources, and the needs will change. And so it makes sense to partner with organizations where that is their expertise. They are leaders in that field. They're the experts, and we can help supplement them by providing them with space and working together with the city to get additional resources in to expand that work. So that's just one example.
So why don't we do this? Again, we're going to take questions. We'll try to take 2 or 3 at a pop in order to make sure that we gives everybody a chance to ask and then a chance to respond. And then there's a pressing question I want to ask in conclusion, but we'll open it up now. So where are the mic folk? You know what? Could you do me a favor? Start back. I want to make sure you got get Adam up front as one of the first queue.
Hi, I'm interested in what are some of the additional levers you're planning to use, thinking about using. So you mentioned tax incentives, some you mentioned bond financing, there's also procurement, of course. But I'm thinking about what are some of the levers you can use as a city. And I'll tee one up for you, deposits.
Can you do me a favor and come here? No. So we're going to take a few at a pop. So we can get this question.
Hi, I'm Rolf Pendahl from the Irvin Institute. The African American home ownership rate in the United States is now at 41%, which is lower than any time since the 1960s before the passage of the Fair Housing Act. I'm wondering what, if anything, all of you are trying to do within your communities to protect and restore home ownership for all the members of your communities. Thank you.
All right, one more, and then we'll take it.
Hello, my name is Adam Jackson. from Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle. Had a question for you, Mayor Lumumba. Here in Baltimore, we recently created a youth fund, a $12 million youth fund for our children and youth here in Baltimore. And part of my work, and because I run a think tank, but part of the work was figuring out how to make sure that money didn't go into the hands of corporate, white-led, nonprofit institutions that say they serve our communities. And so one thing I'm curious about, because part of the work of that was creating an assembly of Baltimore City residents that would decide where that money goes, as opposed to insular groups of gatekeepers that are picked by the administration. So I was curious about the People's Assembly in Jackson and the groundwork that your father, Chokwe Lumumba, laid in Jackson, because we took that straight from his playbook in terms of in Jackson. So we're just curious about your perspective on the groundwork that he laid.
Additional levers, low home ownership in Black communities, and then the special question for Lumumba.
Okay. All right. I'll wait on my question.
I'll talk about home ownership. In the city of Compton, we have a very robust first-time home buyers program that has been very successful in facilitating home ownership to our community. We also create mandatory set-asides and city-assisted development projects where a certain percentage has to be set aside for local home ownership, and the city actually provides our subsidy to facilitate that down payment assistance or the silent second. And those silent seconds range up to $150,000 to make home ownership affordable. We also have partnered with several organizations that are now operating in our city. We have opened up a new Center for Sustainability. That's a beautiful brand new facility led by Neighborhood Housing Services. And they also have first-time home buyers program, but they also have down payment assistance. They have credit counseling, and they do the whole gamut and really helping people understand how their dollars work for them, and really helping our community understand the value of home ownership as an economic engine for sustainability, for generational, and creating generational wealth for generations to come. And so project by project, we look at how can we push the envelope to create more opportunities for our residents. We also have worked with developers who have actually exceeded their mandate that we provided as a city, because they understand the value in really retaining people in the community in those new development projects, because there's that sense of community, there's a sense of ownership, there's a sense of value, and really being able to maintain the beauty and the quality of that development. And so I'm a strong proponent of first-time home buyers program, and the next first-time home buyers program that I'm focusing on launching now is really targeted at millennials and those that are college educated to come back and move into the city of Compton. So that's something new that I'll look forward to sharing next year.
I'll add to the homeowner part as well. In Richmond, we're seeing an uptick in the market's hot in Richmond. I talked about the economic development plan I released maybe 6 weeks ago. It does involve affordable housing, low income, medium income housing, not just rental though. We also want home ownership as well involved here as well. So we're going to focus on making sure that those who may live in census tracts that have high poverty get an opportunity to own homes right in downtown Richmond. A lot of our residents are aging as well. We have a lot of young residents, and we have a lot of residents, particularly African-American residents, who've lived in their home for a very, very long time, and our neighborhoods are changing as well. And as our neighborhoods change, the property values change as well. And so we have older African-American homeowners who can't keep up with the property taxes. And so we're looking at ways that we can lock our homeowners currently into a rate that's affordable, so they're not priced out of their home and no longer get an opportunity to live in a place that they grew up and raised their families as well.
You know, one of the ways that focus on home ownership is rent to own. Our Aurora Housing Authority in the city has partnered with HUD and CDBG, Community Development Block Grant, federal grants, and so we create what's called scatter site housing. Instead of having a low-income housing community like Cabrini Green or something along those lines, or Robert Taylor homes, we have scattered site vouchers where a family can actually take a voucher and rent a home. And in renting this home, we created a program that will prepare them to own that same home after 10 to 15 years of living in that home. And yeah, I think that's a great plan. And you know, growing up in low-income housing in a condensed community myself, I recognize the importance of not having that poverty all in one area, by spreading it out and giving these folks living in, like myself, living in low-income housing areas or needing vouchers, low-income housing vouchers, to see what it's like to own their own home, live in a community, you know, not with a condensed poverty, and other, poor families and single family and single parent families. But to see what it's like to live in a house and to one day own that house. So yeah, I think that's a great program, and that's one of the programs that I think we've focused on and put a lot of effort into over the last couple of years.
Just to add to that particular question, I believe we all live in entitlement cities, and so we all receive federal funding, so we have similar programs. But we also are taking a stance on the issue of gentrification in the city of Jackson. We see gentrification as a war against the people. It moves people from one state of misery to the next. People who are already suffering are pushed more to the periphery and further away from all the resources that aid them. And so I think that we have to look at how we abandon the traditional model of how you develop a city. Traditionally, we look at building great edifices, nice new buildings, and we push people away from being able to obtain those things. And so we're being very strategic in the use of those programs. We have debt counseling programs like you're speaking of, but we're taking a very keen look at how we avoid those. We have a big issue of blight, and we've been blessed, or we're in the process of locking up some grant opportunities to make a significant impact on blight within our community. But in doing so, it raises so many questions about how you just eliminate blight and what it sets up the transition of that community to be. And so we're focusing on and how we establish policy that does not set our community up to push people away.
So do you want to take the
Yes.
question?
Yes. Thank you for your question, brother, and thank you for the work that you're doing. So in Jackson, we establish people's assemblies because we believe in the idea that people need to be involved in the process. In fact, my mission is to give people greater access to their governance than they've ever had before. And so in doing so, we've established quarterly people's assemblies that take place in different areas around town where different issues are raised. And it is not a vehicle of the government. It is its own independent entity that we promote, or I promote, because I believe in its importance, but it should never function as a vessel of the government. It should be an information exchange. It's an opportunity for me to come before the citizens and let them know what some hot button issues are, but it's also an opportunity for the community to inform me. It's an opportunity for me to gain a greater understanding of what they see and what they feel and what's happening. In my previous profession, I share with people, I was an attorney. I am an attorney. I hadn't turned in my life.
Hey, I don't miss
Not
it a bit,
practicing,
brother.
right?
I don't miss it a bit.
I share with people that you depend on expert advice all the time. You deal with doctors, you deal with architects, you deal with other lawyers. And I share with the citizens that the people in the community may or may not be experts in infrastructure, education, crime, and economic development. But whether they are or not experts in those fields, they're all experts in their condition. And so they know what has made life difficult for them. They know where things have worked in the past and where we've abandoned certain areas that we should have maybe stayed with and where we should have reversed course. And so I believe in the process of collective genius. I don't believe that one person has all of the answers to all of the problems or all of the ideas, nor one administration. I believe we're smarter together. And so I submit myself to that process, and I submit myself to critique. And so even in promoting that, ultimately what the goal has to be is that the leadership of that particular body comes from within the body. And so we step back, we allow them to, we encourage them to develop a people's task force where when the assembly is not in session, there are people that they put forth to work on the issues that we've discussed in between those particular meetings, those gatherings.
Now, I know you guys didn't tackle the additional lever question all that much, but why don't we take another round? And if you guys want to chime in with that, you can.
You know, I can, well, we're,
Yeah, in fact.
you want to talk about the lever question?
Yeah, but.
Hi, my name is Dimitri Debu. Actually, sorry to go back, but another question for you, Mr. Lumumba. I've looked into a little bit about Cooperation Jackson and some of the work you guys are doing there. Was wondering what you could offer in terms of what that organization offers for your city and for its people and its goals of self-determination.
So, I'm sorry, I forgot we're doing 3.
Hi, I'm Andrea Whistler, Georgetown University. I'm eager to hear, what do you want to see universities and colleges in your cities do differently or better, or what role would you like them to take? Thanks.
Hi, my name's Isaac Atherstein. I'm from Johns Hopkins University. I was just wondering what role you see getting young people involved in their communities could potentially have on, unifying your cities, restoring faith in the system and reducing inequality.
So we've got Cooperation
Jackson.
Yeah, Cooperation Jackson. Universities, young people. And then again, if you want to deal with the lever question within that, you can.
So go ahead. You can go with the lever. We've been waiting on the lever.
We talked, you had asked about tax incentives and other opportunities other than tax rebates or sales tax rebates or property tax rebates. One of the things that we do in Illinois, and we take huge advantage of it in the city of Aurora, is we have what are called TIF districts, tax increment finance district. And for example, let's say in a particular area, square mile area, that's because it's blighted and there's no business there and there's nothing been going on there for years. The average tax in that particular area for that property, for all those properties, is $1,000 a year, just for the sake of conversation. So we say, if you move into this blighted area and you help to change this area and you help to bring increment or value to this area, let's say you bring it up to $10,000 a year, we'll give you that extra $9,000 that you created in increment back that you can put into your business, or we can keep it in that particular area so we can help grow that particular area. So any increment that this business creates, it gives them an incentive, money in their pocket to continue to grow or to run their business. So we use TIF districts throughout the city of Aurora, and it's been working very successful.
Universities, young people?
So in Richmond, we have 4 universities in our footprint. University of Richmond, VCU, Virginia Union, HBCU, and the community college, all in our footprint. And what we began doing, number one, is I brought my executive leadership team and have sat down with at least 2 of the colleges already, their leadership, because they're using our resources. The one thing about universities particularly is they don't pay taxes. And that's okay, because they add other value because they're going out and buying and purchasing goods right in our city and adding value there. But what I asked them to give back, though, is their generosity. Though they have a lot of young progressives who want to be engaged in the city in terms of fighting the issues on poverty, on healthcare, you name it. And so what I always request is that I want more and more, particularly our largest university, Virginia Commonwealth University, how can you be involved in our public housing areas on healthcare, or how can you be involved in we have a rising, a growing Latino population? How can I get some of your Spanish speakers to work in our city to help us with our children having parent-teacher conferences, and you using your translation skills to help us out there? Just those little asks go a very, very long way. I sit here today, I would not be here if it wasn't for college kids as the 80th mayor of Richmond. And so I lean into young people in our city having a voice in our city, not just during presidential elections or whatnot, but ensuring that they actually can participate in our city.
I just encourage universities to really take a strong stance to help lifting a community that you're within, and really creating vehicles of investment to not just come and intern or to be fellows, but to really look at a public issue, and to really see how bringing all of the all of the educational, the economic, and all of the various resources that colleges can bring to really help address that issue for a specific time frame, and to really see if we can move the needle. And I'm really blessed to be able to have a strong relationship with USC, my alma mater, and they have a community programs office, and they're really big on being out in the community, affecting change, and even mandating some of their student athletes to come and do certain service projects. And so we have a lot that they've done in our community. We're focusing on a lot more, but to really think about having a center for innovation in that community, because the city, our job is to provide services, and we supplement all the things that the private sector cannot do or that is not in the community. But to really have the university be a strong leader could be just game changing. And to consider that universities are considered to be nonpartisan, and so thinking about different political issues depending on the community, they could really be a neutral and trusted source to facilitate conversations, such as what happens in in Jackson, but also on a larger level, and thinking about how we can help integrate our social capital with the economic capital, and then the educational capital. But there has to be a strategy, and there has to be a strong sense of investment from that university to create that presence and to create an office and to really have a physical footprint to keep that relationship going. Yes.
Cooperation Jackson, and then we'll do is take one more round.
Okay, so with respect to Cooperation Jackson, I'll just give this disclaimer. I don't speak for Cooperation Jackson, but I do have relationships with many of the organizers that are part of it, and I push forward the work that they're principally behind accomplishing, and that is working towards a solidarity economy. I spoke about cooperative businesses and using that as a vehicle to stimulate our local economy in Jackson. And I think that we are a bit limited in what we imagine cooperative businesses to be, and we are a bit limited in our understanding of the benefits of cooperative businesses. I had the opportunity to go to Barcelona, Spain, long before everything that's taking place happened. But I had the opportunity to walk with the mayor of Barcelona at that time, the vice mayor of Barcelona, and we talked about the cooperative businesses that they were using to support their community and how it was rendering a benefit. When you look at a cooperative business, and I represent a city and the population of which is 85% African American. And so we often have conversations about supporting small businesses and particularly supporting black businesses. And that's a good discussion to have. But we even have to recognize within that conversation the limitations there. Because a black business is like any business, that it looks to exploit its market. And after it's made so much money, it has the option of abandoning the community that served it to begin with, or gave it its roots. And so we're seeing businesses in Jackson that have done well, that have produced quite a bit of revenue for themselves. But as I stated from the very beginning of our conversation, there was no investment in the community itself. And so we're looking to establish models of businesses which its mission is not only to fill a void, but also to serve the community which gives gives birth to it, right? And so I think that's an important thing to recognize, and not, you're accused of being all kinds of, ridiculous things when you start talking about cooperative businesses, socialists and communists and everything else. But if you really look at the landscape of our country and the world, you see that cooperative businesses are being utilized each and every day. Land O'Lakes Butter is a cooperative. Florida Orange Growers is a cooperative. Ace Hardware is a cooperative. I'm from Detroit, so it pains me to say this, but one of the largest cooperative businesses we see in this country today is really the Green Bay Packers.
That's to say,
right?
Green Bay, yeah.
The city of Green Bay, which is smaller in size than the city of Jackson, has found a way to own its own professional football team.
And they're grandfathered in. They're the only ones that can do it.
They don't. So
and they win world championships too.
Yeah.
We don't want to mention that part. but I'm of the mind that if Green Bay can figure out how to own its own professional football team, then Jackson, Mississippi can figure out how to own its own movie theater. All right.
So Well, so I saw some other hands, and the thing is we knew when we organized this that each of these mayors had enough expertise to actually speak for a whole day, but we'd be time constrained. But you all don't seem to be, edging towards the liquor. I'm sorry, the beer and the wine. So maybe one more round, and then we're out.
Thank you. Von Washington with the Kalamazoo Promise Scholarship. All of you have expressed an interest and know how important human capital investment is. I'm wondering, in your community transformations, what role you see for the K-12 school system, public schools in particular, and what you would like to see them do or be able to do to help in this overall community transformation.
I'd like to.
We
Let me take a couple of questions. Yeah. You got three, right? I was about to jump into that.
Ken and Fikri with the Economic Innovation Group. I'm curious what you all are doing to help entrepreneurs grow in your communities, because that's really, part of rebuilding the fabric of cities in America is rebuilding the companies that employ folks. And then what you're hearing from entrepreneurs, what the biggest barriers are. Is it access to capital, talent, just awareness? Thank you.
Williams, Baltimore Development Corporation. This question is for Mayor Lumumba. Where is the funding coming from for the teen centers, and who manages them?
And I'll add one more question in the role as chair. So I'll actually push back gently against the idea that entrepreneurship is kind of the solution to our cities. I believe that political organizing and political activism is the solution to our cities. So you all are black mayors that had to be, given that you're new mayors, that had to be kind of a political program that put you in office. What do you do, or what plans have you put in place, if any, to make sure that stable and those dynamics you create in office while you're there exist after you're gone?
I would say, number one, I actually agree with you wholeheartedly. I think that the city has a responsibility and the opportunity to really assess what pillars of its society are in decay, and really focus on implementing those so that you can have balance. Because anytime you have poverty or different issues in your community, or social issues, there's some pillar that has failed, and it needs additional intervention or assistance. And so for me, with Compton, it's had a long history of political instability, corruption, all the things that really, nepotism, cronyism, that I'm still dealing with today because of the way that our city is structured. And so we're a charter city, which means we have our own constitution. And so we have a combination of a council mayor government. And so any three council members can decide they can team up and create havoc on the structure of our society. And so my next wave is really focusing on how do we, number one, educate, engage, and empower our community members. And it has to be about civic education and leadership development. For me, it doesn't matter if we can create this, well, for me, it's almost a waste of investment in time, which is our most valuable commodity, of building all of these great systems and really restructuring community. And then the next wave of political regime can come and destroy that and decimate it. And it's happening in Compton. I've seen it myself from my predecessors. And so for me, we're focusing on building the next generation of leaders, creating a structured way for people to actually be trained in leadership development, to really understand how their government works, who's in power, which opportunities do they have to affect change when they come up, and to really use technology as a way to really bridge the gap between generations that feel that their vote doesn't count, and they're growing up in a whole different reality than many of us are dealing with. And so we're using a technology app that we're rolling out next year, and then it's going to be coupled with different sections for just understanding the basics. Who's in charge of your school district? There's an assumption almost generally that the mayor or the city controls the school district, when in Compton we do not. In many cities across the nation, mayors or cities do not govern their school district. They're separate joint power entities. They have their own elected bodies. You can have a beautiful 12-point strategy, but if that school district and those elected individuals, who most people don't even know because it's considered to be a low-profile position, however they impact the education, the future development of our society. And so for me, I've had pushback from our school district from day one. We've sent millions of dollars of resources from private companies directed to the school district, and there's still that struggle. And so I can continue to look at our political structure. I have a few choices here. I can look at the political structure, be frustrated. That's not an option. I'm not a quitter. Number two, I can morph into a super politician and start, being political and doing all these things, but it's not in my DNA. I can't even stomach that. Or 3, I actually give power to the people and let them take their city back, because that's the only way to create sustainable changes, when you have a community that is educated, engaged, and empowered. And that's the only way. And that's the same is true for our own nation.
Yeah.
I want to add to that because, I ran for mayor as I was going to be the education mayor. I was going to put children first. And just like your city, I'm sure many of us up here and many of our colleagues as well, I don't control public schools. But everybody knows it's the #1 issue, particularly in inner cities. But no one wants to be responsible. No one wants to be responsible for it because they know how tough it is. And I'll admit, I've leaned in from day one. I put more money into public education, retaining teachers. I visit every public school. I created a framework for the school board and the city council and the mayor to work together to tackle the tough issues. But when folks called for change throughout the race last year in 2016 in my city, I'm the one who presented an education plan and said, all right, I think the mayor should have a role. And folks said, well, the mayor should have a role. And then when I get elected, and I said, well, we're going to have a role. It means we're going to have measurements and metrics on how we're going to meet. We should have on-time graduation rates. We should do all these things that any locality should do. And then I got the pushback. Whoa, you overstepping your bounds a little bit, Mayor. Right. I mean, just recently, I created an initiative. I'm going to go out to colleges throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia and recruit qualified teachers to come teach in the inner city. I'm going to go to HBCUs. I'm going to go to just colleges everywhere. And there were some folks who are right now on the school board who are upset about me going out and recruiting teachers. There's a 200-person teacher shortage in the city of Richmond. And they're upset with me? Let me see your plan. What you gonna do?
Right.
And so, So, as you talk about upsetting the political system, I am a product of, I've worked my career from the time I graduated from college. I worked through the Democratic Party. I was an organizer, I knocked on doors. I understand the mechanics of politics and government. I know how to organize. And I was not picked to win my race. There was someone else who was picked to win the race. And in Richmond, like many other cities, there's ward bosses and neighborhood leaders that you gotta kind of have on your side. Well, I had none of that. But what I had was my energy, my willingness to go into neighborhoods that people said I couldn't go into. And what I've done today is continue with that same sort of energetic role as mayor, is that I've done town halls throughout the city. I go on neighborhood walks. I'll go with the city council person they want me to. I'm everywhere all the time because I want to have a direct relationship with the residents instead of having it be filtered through a city council person who can hold me hostage, basically. And if you can take your message, whether it's through social media or just in person, to the people, they will respect you for that, and they will respect you for trying as well. Yes, I don't control public schools. I can't tell you what the curriculum should be or not, but at least I can have an influence on making it better. And I think that should be the goal for everyone who holds a certificate of election.
Absolutely. And let me follow up on that. I was also one of the only candidate that focused on education, recognizing that the school district is a different governmental taxing body. Totally different, and we, as the mayor of my city, have no control over our education. But as I told you earlier, we have 6 different school districts inside of Aurora. 3 that actually sit inside the city of Aurora, and 3 where they bus kids out to those particular schools outside of our district, that their school district touches our district. So recognizing the importance of school district, people moving out of the city based on the success of a school district. If we're saying we want to improve our areas, especially our impoverished areas, the only way that we're going to get people to move in is if they offer their kids good education. Right. That's the first thing a parent's going to ask when they're moving to an area. What kind of future is my child going to have? What kind of education is my child going to get? And if they don't think there's any value to the education in that particular area, they're not going to move there. That's right. Simple as that. So one of the things I thought that was important, to bring all these school districts together, recognizing that I have no actual say in how a school district functions, is I want to create, and I'm creating as we speak, what's called an education commission, to where we have representatives from every single school district. We have representatives from our business community, representatives from our social service community. We have parents on there talking about what we need to do, not just from K to 12, but 0 to 3, we have this thing called SPARK, strong, prepared, and ready for kindergarten, before they get to kindergarten. And not stopping at 12th grade, but junior college and all the way to the college level. We got to focus on education, from 0 all the way to 21. And this education commission that I want to create is going to be sharing resources, sharing ideas, sharing best practices, and talking about how we can continually improve our educational circumstances in the city of Aurora. So, and that'll be created. I've been here 6 months, so I know the mayor just walked in the room.
What's up? But I have to hear Mayor Lumumba after that question before we go to the mayor.
Okay, so all of the questions that you asked, I really want to touch on. So I'm just not going to look at the timekeeper as I go through this.
Detroit, baby.
Yeah. As it pertains, and I'll answer this quickly, as it pertains to the teen centers, first and foremost, that's not a completed idea. It's something that we're underway with now. One, we have the benefit that we already own the facilities because these are schools that have closed. As we've looked at the population of our students, our student body is not the size that it was at the time that these facilities were created. And so we're repurposing these buildings. But it's also about how you look at your budget and what you allocate towards policing and what is the proper balance there. And also implementing measures that go in another direction to look at a more comprehensive approach towards the issue of crime, knowing that we can't out-police it. So there are various grant opportunities that we automatically think about hiring more and more and more police, and you have to have that proper balance, but there are other things that impact it. As it pertains to the area of education, actually we just stepped out of, I don't want to say stepped out, we're enthralled in a very interesting dynamic as it pertains to Jackson Public Schools. Jackson Public Schools, as recent as about a month and a half ago, was declared under a state of an emergency by the state school board and was all but the governor's signature away from being taken over by the state. As we talked around the country with different mayors, we asked them how we address this, and essentially the answer we received is that you can't stop it. All you need to do is find, a way that maybe you could have some say-so in who the conservator is, right? Well, we went to the governor and spoke about some things that would affect him, and we implemented that operational unity. And we were able to accomplish something that is not only unique in Jackson, but unique to the rest of the country. And we were able to maintain local control. What we did was we created an education excellence advisory commission that is made up of 15 members. We created an MOU between the governor, between myself, and between the Kellogg Foundation. And we all had 5 selections to this commission, individuals who have been experts in the field of education. And what this commission is tasked with doing, they do not supplant the school board. In fact, I had a very unique situation. I don't have that relationship with my school board members because I actually got the opportunity to select all 7 of my school board members.
Wow.
Right?
Oh, wow.
So,
no comment.
So they're my
Right, look at you.
Yeah, like that. I'm congratulating them. I'm not going to say anything on that front.
So this commission looks at identifying the needs of our public school system, seeing, basically looking at things like the financial structure and offering suggestion, offering counsel. They don't make the decisions. The Kellogg Foundation is funding intentional community discussions, so we identify what the goals and aspirations of the community are for our education, for our students. And then what the commission is tasked with doing is selecting a third-party evaluator that could evaluate where we find JPS versus where the goals and aspirations would have us to be, and doing a gap analysis, right? And that third-party evaluator would then offer suggestions to our school board. And so this process has left me far more engaged than any other mayor in the city has ever been in the education process. And we think that it requires a collaboration on all of those fronts in order to make it happen. And probably the most critical, without question, the most critical participant in that process is the community itself. Because no structure, nothing that you can identify, you can have the best consulting in the world. If the community doesn't buy into it, then it's not going to succeed. And so what we're looking at, I tell people I come from a family of organizers. I tell people we have some great organizers throughout history, the Martin Luther Kings, the Marcus Garveys, the Medgar Evers. But the greatest organizer of all time is oppression. Right? And so we can come back to that as we think about being in Trump times, right? But as the community has witnessed the threat of the state taking over the school system, we've seen people crossing party lines, people who normally don't organize or work together have come together for the mission of working for the benefit of our students. And so my tagline was, this is where the radical mayor and the conservative governor come together to get the job done, right? But we were able to organize the community based on this, and so we don't want to lose that momentum. And so that's why those discussions that Kellogg is funding, and Kellogg is funding what we see comes out of the gap analysis, right? They're going to support the funding of providing those things to the school district. But that's important that we have the community engaged in the process. You could select the best, you could have a wonderful relationship with your school board. If the community doesn't buy into it, then it's not going to succeed.
That's true. All right, so on that note, I know that you guys want to hear the People Assembly answer. For those who do, walk up, but we want to stop and give the mayor a chance to say something if she wanted to. Otherwise,
let's give these guys a round of applause. Thank you. Thanks.